Did you know that a nation's foundation can be built upon myths? In this video, we conduct a fully evidence-based examination of how distortions within certain sacred texts have been transformed into powerful narratives that have aided in advancing the political agendas of specific groups. This video examines the distortions in the sacred texts of the Old and New Testaments and their exploitation to create myths that serve the political and ideological goals of Zionism. These myths form the foundation of Israel's existence, and by exposing their distortions and contradictions, the ideological underpinnings of Zionism can be challenged. The topic will be comprehensively analyzed in what follows. Zionism is built upon myths rooted in distortions of sacred texts, particularly the Old Testament. Unlike states formed based on race, ethnicity, or migration, Israel's existence lacks historical and factual roots and relies solely on myths constructed to justify its establishment. In the minds of their adherents, myths are rooted in a reality without a specific time or place. Questioning these myths undermines Israel's existence. For example, the Jewish identity as a religion or race lacks a clear definition. Reports indicate that 75 to 85% of Israel's residents are secular, and there is significant racial diversity, from African to European Jews. The Bible, comprising 39 books of the Old Testament and 27 books of the New Testament, forms the basis for Zionist myth-making. But these texts are replete with contradictions and distortions. The Old Testament includes the Torah, the first 5 books, prophets and writings. Evidence suggests these texts were written by various individuals centuries after the claimed events. For example, in the Torah, Moses is described in the third person, and even his death is narrated, indicating authorship by someone else. Historical contradictions are evident in the Hebrew, Greek, and Samaritan versions of the Old Testament. For example, the time from Adam to Noah's flood is recorded as 1,656 years in the Hebrew version, 1,307 years in the Samaritan version, and 2,262 years in the Greek version. Researcher Thomas Mitchell asserts that the Torah was compiled in the 5th century before the birth of Christ, approximately 800 years after Moses, from oral traditions, and has undergone changes over time. Furthermore, Jeremiah in the Old Testament points to the distortion of texts, accusing scribes of falsehood. Zionism has created myths through the distortion of sacred texts to advance its political objectives. Some of these myths include the Promised Land, the chosen people, ethnic cleansing, the genocide of European Jews during World War II. About the Promised Land, it is claimed that God promised the land of Canaan to Abraham and his descendants. However, the Quran emphasizes that the Jews lost this right by breaking the divine covenant. About the chosen people, which is rooted in Kabbalistic beliefs, this myth considers Jews the only true humans, deeming others subhuman, serving as a justification for racial superiority. About ethnic cleansing, which is derived from the Old Testament, this myth justifies the destruction of other peoples. An example is the Sabra and Shatila massacre led by Sharon. About the genocide of European Jews during World War II, it is claimed that this myth was constructed to instill fear of anti-Semitism and justify Jewish migration to Palestine. Exposing its distortions undermines Israel's legitimacy. Evangelical Christians, through distortions of the New Testament, support the myth of Armageddon. They believe that for the Messiah to appear, Jews must return to Palestine, the Al-Aqsa Mosque must be destroyed, and the Temple of Solomon rebuilt. This final war, in which Muslims are portrayed as the Antichrist, will lead to the destruction of the world and the Messiah's advent. Evangelicals provide financial and military support to Israel to advance this scenario. However, some Orthodox Jews, such as the Neturei Karta movement, consider returning to Palestine before the Messiah's arrival a grave sin. The media is Zionism's primary tool for promoting these myths. For example, the film The Lord of the Rings was inspired by the story of Solomon's ring to undermine Islamic messianic beliefs. Zionism sustains these myths by oscillating between religious and racial claims. Exposing the distortions in sacred texts and myths can dismantle the ideological foundations of Zionism. Zionist myths, from the Promised Land to the Chosen People and Armageddon, are rooted in distortions of sacred texts. These distortions, supported by evangelical Christians, have been used to justify Israel's existence and advance its political goals. Exposing these contradictions and distortions can undermine this ideology without the need for military conflict. What are your thoughts on this matter? Share them with us in the comments section.